Okay, so I wanted to go through some different methods that you can use during a needs assessment. These are just really the top ways of conducting needs assessments. And I'll just walk you through some of the pros and cons of each that you can use when you are designing your own needs assessments, both for your exercise and for your final project. So, one way of conducting a needs assessment is through individual interview. You can talk to somebody face to face or over the phone. This can work well, especially if you're going to have a smaller group. Or I would even say if you're going to have a group of up to 30, you can talk to some specific or particular individuals. You want to try to talk to a representation across different roles and responsibilities. If you're talking to a group at a company or any other splits that make sense, just try to talk to like a representative from each of these different groups that you've identified as important. Some of the pros of the individual interview are you can have some real honest and frank conversations. Folks tend to be, I've found, pretty straightforward with you. They feel like you're sort of an external person. They understand that you're trying to help them. And you kind of walk them through what you're doing and what you're trying to do, and laying out any confidentiality statements, letting them know that you're going to put together a report or how you're going to use this information, who it's going to get to. And I usually tell people that I won't be using names unless they're comfortable with me using an example, and I can ask them that at the time. You do have to be careful. You can't assume that everybody will be straightforward and honest with you, especially some will think that you are just sort of an earpiece for management or a different group and still not be comfortable sharing some of the things that are important to know with you. Another con that I've seen with individual interviews is you have some folks who are just not good interviewees. You ask them a question and they seem to always find a way to give you 2 or 3 words, 2 or 3 word answers that you really just can't glean a lot from. And that can be difficult. And it's easy to misinterpret too, although oftentimes it's easy to think, well, they don't care, they don't want to do this training, they're not interested. Sometimes it's just because they're running short on time. They're still not quite sure what this training is about. Nobody's given them a background. You did, but they're still not quite sure what your role is or what you're doing. So they're confused. It's hard to answer the questions in those situations. Although if you sense that's happening, I would take the time to explain to them more what you're doing. Let's see, if you get too many individuals, like say you're doing a training of 30 and you interview 30 people, that can be a lot to compile and a lot to really condense down into something that you'll use for a report. That's why generally I would want to talk to around 8 people for a group that size. And that seems to usually be a solid representation of the different groups. One thing I'll ask the people who are identifying who I should talk to, whether that's leadership or a champion group, it's kind of what I call the group tasked with finding a trainer. I totally just blanked on what I was going to say. Oh, I will ask them to identify some people who are going to be very excited about this training and some people who are sort of your curmudgeons, for lack of a better word. Those people who are not going to be very excited. Because you want both perspectives. You'll have both in the room usually, so you want to know what to expect. And the nice thing is with those curmudgeons, if they feel like they're brought into the process earlier and their voice is part of the design, they're more likely to engage in the training when it actually happens. They feel like they were a part of creating it. You sought their advice early on, and sometimes they create your biggest advocates for the training after they really understand that you took the time to understand what was going on and to design a program that really met their needs. So that's another pro. Let's see. Focus groups are another way to do it. Again, Sometimes you can get a very honest and frank group. It can depend on whether that group's worked together before or if you've just kind of pulled a random group together to serve as a focus group. It can be nice to reach some gentle agreement or some consensus on some areas. Sometimes when you talk to all these individuals, it's hard to know what the consensus would be since you just got a bunch of individual opinions. But if you have them working as a group, you can design actually that focus group so that they are coming to kind of some gentle agreement, like this is what we need, this is the most important, this is the priority, this would be nice, but we don't need it at this time, and that sort of thing. The other con is when you get a focus group, I think I went through the rule of 4 with you before. The rule of 4 is you get over a group of 4, or you get a group of around 10 people together, and 4 people will do 80% of the talking. And I'm sure we've all experienced this being in classrooms or meetings or what have you. It's easy to lose some voices. So a couple things on that. That can be a con. It can take some more active facilitation, but sometimes you just lose some of those voices that are more comfortable talking one-to-one or more comfortable filling out a survey or writing down what they think of something. So something to consider. A survey is another way to do a needs assessment. This works well for big groups, unless I tend to be an open-ended question kind of person, so I oftentimes end up with a whole lot of work afterward trying to compile all of those individual responses. I feel that surveys, another con with surveys, are the information you get is really limited. You really have to make sure those questions are focused and specific and really getting at what you need, because it's so easy to misunderstand what they're asking or what they're after. And we've all taken surveys, and I'm sure we've all had to assess the results of surveys and know that people can go way off, and you're like, man, I didn't even think that was a possible response when I read that question, but now I realize that everybody went there, or that made the most sense given their context. So that can be difficult, but it is nice because then you've gotten everyone's response. One thing to think about is with any of these designs, when you're talking to individuals and getting their perspective, and I think this is even stronger with individual interviews or focus groups, is when they give you their advice, they have expectations then that it will be incorporated into the training. So that is a risk, but I think it's a necessary risk to really understand what's going on. But you want to take some time to kind of manage those expectations while you're having individual conversations, or at the front or back end of the survey, probably front end, saying, you know, we're trying to get this input. We realize we can't please everybody, but this is what we're going to try to glean from this, and this is how we're going to use it. So managing those expectations are important, but also acknowledging that no matter how you manage them, when you ask a question and somebody gives you time to talk through something, they develop an expectation that that will be used and incorporated, and they'll see it in whatever the training ends up being. So something to be aware of. And of course, you can always combine different types of these methods. Again, I've used all of them, but I have found what I usually do is I'll do a focus group with the leadership, if I can get them together for a focus group, because that group has been working together so far and kind of developed the need that they've seen before they call me as a group. So it makes sense to keep talking with them in that way. And then I'll do individual interviews with some of the prospective learners. So that is how I generally conduct the needs assessments and some of the top methods for conducting the needs assessments. So I will pause. We'll go to the next video and talk about learning outcomes briefly.